I'm Mike Mistel. I'm the Social Studies Department Chair at Lakeland Union High School in Minocqua, Wisconsin. I'm doing this lesson today, Introduction to a Lesson Plan entitled Native American Resistance. Wisconsin has a law called Act 31, which requires the teaching of Native American history, tribal sovereignty, and treaty rights in Wisconsin classrooms. And this is a lesson that I use to teach Act 31 material in American history class. During the 1960s, there were tremendous fights for rights in the United States. For example, the Civil Rights Movement that resulted in African American improvement of treatment in voting and other examples were very important in that time period. The American Indian Movement was created in 1968, and the American Indian Movement had a big impact on Native people fighting for rights and better treatment in Wisconsin and throughout the country. One of the first events that happened with the American Indian Movement was the takeover of Alcatraz prison in 1969. The takeover of the prison had been abandoned government property, and according to a treaty from the 1860s, that surplus government property would revert back to control by the Lakota tribe. So using that law as their starting point, a group of Native people occupied Alcatraz from 1969 until early in 1971. That 19-month occupation was very important in reawakening people in America to the plight of Native American people, to the living conditions that people were living through at the time, and also to the treaties that had been signed, and many of those treaties that had been broken or forgotten throughout time. The way that I teach about that occupation is by using a documentary called Alcatraz is Not an Island. It's not an island, it's an idea, or it's a reawakening of those rights. And that documentary goes through that 19-month time period, and they're introduced to many of the important leaders of the time, people that were involved in that occupation. And it's a 60-minute video, so I usually show that over the course of 2 class periods. The corresponding discussion that comes from that, usually that inspires students to ask a lot of questions. It's an event that they haven't known much about previously. From that point, there are people from Alcatraz went all over the country and started resistant movements in other places. Examples of that were the 1972 Trail of Broken Treaties that resulted in the occupation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs building in Washington, D.C. The 1973 occupation or takeover at Wounded Knee, the government siege that happened there, the 71-day standoff, which also resulted in a few people being killed in that standoff. And then the National Day of Mourning protest that happened in 1975 at Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. That centers around Thanksgiving holiday. So those are some of the important events that happened in that time period, but that doesn't mean that resistance was something that happened only in history. So as an extension of that idea of fighting back against the government, of fighting for rights and really how democracy works, how our First Amendment rights are applied in our country, I have the students do research. And in researching, we try to use more modern day examples. And there's many, many examples where tribes have fought against the government and have been able to get much better treatment in return of rights. A great example of that in Wisconsin are the treaty rights, the spearfishing controversies that happened 1970s and 1980s into the early 90s. But the return of treaty rights in Wisconsin has been very important. A very modern day one, the one that will happen this fall for the first time, is the elk hunt in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a stronger elk herd than we've had in many, many years. As an example of the treaty rights that Ojibwe people have preserved to this day, the 10 elk that will be harvested this year, 5 will be harvested by Ojibwe tribal members and 5 will be harvested by non-tribal members. So there's a sharing of the resources. So I have the students research modern day examples of resistance. It might include the Crandon Mine, where the Mole Lake Ojibwe and the Menominee have combined to purchase the Crandon mine site and stop a mine that could have contaminated the Wolf River. Or it might include the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, one that has received a lot of publicity lately in the news. In northern Wisconsin, the Gogebic mine that was could have threatened the Bad Water reservations, Bad River, and also threatened Lake Superior. So there's many examples. A website that I use, Native Resurgence, has a list of quite a few different events, and students can also go off of the list and look for things of their own. But once they have done some research, and there's usually several days that we research in class, I have the students then find a video clip, and usually a video clip might be a news clip, or it might be an interview of somebody that was part of that event, and they'll use that then to present to the class. So the students actually become teachers, and they teach the other class members about their research topic. I'll have the students write 3 research questions that will be used to guide the class in some discussion. We'll have the video clip as part of that, and the students will also present some of the background knowledge that was relevant to that time period or that event. Following the completion of that, then we have learned about numerous examples of resistance where Native people have, through their own cohesiveness and their own efforts, have fought for better rights and better treatment, and how treatment today is much better than it was throughout history. So that's my lesson on Native American resistance. Hope that's something that you can find useful and could use or modify in your own classroom.